came down, because you're right. I mean, you're such an integral part of the history of the Resource Center. And when, just a little background, you came from Italy, right?
Right.
And what kind of brought you here?
Well, it's one of those long stories that I'll keep short,
Well, that's okay, go.
but I was actually told to come here to the States. I don't know if you're aware of that. So in what back then was kind of a typical Italian experience, at the end of 5th grade, you really had to start making decisions, you know,
Yeah.
whether you went ahead with studies or not. And it just so happened that this one missionary came to my town and kind of allured me with stories of, hey, did you ever think about going to Africa and see big animals and this and that? And at the age, my mom had just died at that point, so I was actually 9 years old only. But so I said, yeah, this sounds good. And so I ended up in this seminary of missionaries. They were actually based in Turin, but they had a seminary close to my hometown. About 160 of us from what would have been, there they called the middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and then they called it 4th and 5th gymnasium for the 9th and 10th grade, and then it would go ahead with Lyceum Classical. But anyway, so I entered the seminary, and they became my life, truly. You know, like it was, you know, very disciplined, but a lot of fun. You know, like we would play and we would do a lot of fun things. But then there was study, there was prayer, there was Silentium Magnum. You ever heard that one?
No.
The major silence from evening time until the end of the mass the next day. No talking. Whoa. So it was kind of the monastic type of you know, rules style. But anyway, I entered the seminary, went through high school. The typical path was like you would do 1 year in novitiate, you know, to consider whether you actually wanted to enter, to continue. And I went up in the mountains, again, another beautiful, fun year. Then you would have 2 years of philosophy and 4 years of theology. But being missionaries, there are places all over the place. There are places in England, in Spain, in Portugal, around Italy, like Rome, Milan, and so on. So anyway, so first year of philosophy, I was sent in Turin. So spent in Turin, was first experience in the city. And then at the end of that, the Father Superior called me up and said, by the way, you know, we would like for you to go to a place called Buffalo, New York. I said, okay, whatever, Buffalo, New York, we'll find out. And again, there was no hesitation. I knew that I had to go somewhere. Kind of excited when I heard it was actually in the States. Came 4 of us at the same time. And so ended up in a place in Buffalo. They had just built a brand new seminary with no seminarians to be found, so they imported 4 of us. And then they allowed us to explore, as opposed to go for philosophy only, to actually explore other subjects. So like a friend of mine that has since gone down to Tanzania and spent the whole life there, he took biology, became a professor down there and just retired a couple of years ago. I decided to take anthropology, you know, so I would learn about cultures and such. And then after a year and a half I was here, again, keep in mind, I came here at 19 years old. So then by the time I'm 20, 21, kind of coming into my own, having all sorts of issues, you know, with kind of the whole ecclesiastical hierarchy and structure and da-da-da, and feeling, I don't think that I really can be genuine to this. Decided to leave. Those priests very supportive of it. And basically left. I was already going to University of Buffalo at that point, and found a job, found a place to live, and I was on my own. And my folks at home saying, what are you doing? You know, because it's such a departure from here in the States, the ability of basically becoming independent and quickly, versus in Italy where it's like you have to follow like all sorts of supports before you really go on your own. So anyway, that's what then led me at the end of anthropology. I was able to get the bachelor in 2 years. And then, of course, coming from that environment, what I wanted to pursue was something that would still allow me to work on behalf of people. And what I heard that the degree that allowed you to do that was social work. So that's what led me to pursue a master in social work. And then
At SUNY Buffalo.
at SUNY Buffalo. And then I actually continued, after I got my master, I actually continued for about 5 years to get a certificate in mental health service administration with the, it was called the community psychiatry.
So, let's put you back in perspective. You're born when?
In 49.
49, so you're a couple years older than me. You would have been, your mother died at age 9.
My father remarried at that point.
Okay. And you were living kind of in northern Italy, right?
Yeah, like close to Lake Como.
Okay. And Lake Como, that's where the Mussolini found his end, wasn't it?
That's right. And we are, Mr. Clooney is finding a nice villa to
Yeah. He hasn't
rest and
invited you
enjoy
back?
Italy. Yeah. He hasn't invited me yet, no.
You know. Lake Como, that's a beautiful place, beautiful place. What'd your dad do for a living?
So my dad had a fascinating experience too. So my dad, so he had my mom, who was from a region up in the Alps, in the Dolomites, very kind of isolated town up in the Alps. My father from my hometown, close to the city called Lecco, a small city, but close to Milan. And the two of them eventually, they end up working for this aristocratic family. I mean, Italy was still very classist. You know, you had people with, you know, that came from titles and aristocracy and land ownership, and then kind of the masses, and then a few people that made it, you know, maybe with studies and so on. So they both ended up working together for this family of aristocrats that had a villa in a place in Milan. They had a villa on Lake Como with their own private orphanage. And this guy, by the name of Nogara, was the ambassador first for Italy before even Mussolini, you know, took over, to Turkey. So he spent time in Constantinople. And then the Bishop of Milan became the Pope, Pius XI. So he becomes the Pope. He goes down to Rome, to the Vatican. And back then, there's a book called the Vatican's Financiers. So back then, in the 30s, the Vatican was really in shambles financially. So the Pope knows of Mr. Nogara and invites him to take over the finances. And Mr. Nogara did an incredible job, so much so that part of his investment, so of course they invested into a lot of fascists and Nazis, you know, the war machine that was taking place back then. But also part of what happened with the armistice between the Mussolini eventually did with the Vatican, because until then they would not recognize each other.
Right.
Italy ended up giving a lot of money to the Vatican in exchange for the recognition. Nogara invested the money, a lot of the money in world issues in Europe, a lot of money here in the States, in America. And he also created title companies with subsidiaries so that when the excess was no longer allowed to, you know, to do any type of economic transactions with the U.S., that the U.S. prohibited any economic trade and kind of an embargo, you know, with the excess. All sorts of companies used these Vatican's subsidiaries because he bypassed the excess. So again, he did extremely well. But anyway, my father and mother worked for that family. And so my dad ended up spending about 20 years in Rome. So he kind of escaped a lot of the nonsense, you know, with the fascism and some of the hardship too. And also was able to get kind of acculturated. Again, he never went to school, but he was like the maestro of the band in my town. And, you know, down in Rome, he got to see operas and, you know, go to different presentations. So he came back to Galbiate as like one of the more learned, you know, people. But so when he retired, when she and my mom got married, and they were expecting my first sister, Nogara gave him a job at the bank in Lecco. So they became a banker until he retired. And so he had a pretty interesting, fascinating life, and so did my mom.
So, their son is going to become a Catholic priest.
And
That's the
they're
dream.
thrilled about it.
That's
Exactly.
the dream. I've,
Yeah.
I've heard that from several sources.
Yeah.
And in fact, Ed was going to be one. He'll tell you later. And then you come to America, you get seduced by what's going on, you get exposed, and you sort of move away. What was the reaction of your dad?
So interesting. I think my stepmother at that time took a much more hard than my dad. My dad, and again, keep in mind back then, no telephones.
Yeah, yeah.
So the only interaction is written correspondence,
Yeah.
where you send a letter, and then 2 months later they receive it, and 2 months later you get their response. But some letters very preoccupied, almost angry on the part of my stepmother, like, how can you do this? My father more like, are you sure what you're doing? You don't have any. And another bit of a story is that my real mom, she happened to own a piece of land up in the mountain, and since my dad had no use for it, ended up selling it to my uncle, and then invested those few dollars from that parcel of land in the bank. So when I was here and I leave the seminary, I'm on my own, and the difficulty at that point is like to go to classes, right, for school, and to keep the job. And so I said, by the way, don't I have some money there that my mom had for me, set up for me? He said, yeah, I still have it. So how about if you send it to me, sends me the money, I buy a car. Unfortunately, I buy a car that I'm familiar with, a Fiat. So that became a little problematic through the winter. But nevertheless, it allowed me to do just that, to be able to keep up school and put in as many hours as I could on a job. I was working for a Leader drugstore warehouse. I don't know if you ever remember those. And but so yeah, the reaction was first kind of like anger, and I'm sure a lot of concern. Not understanding the circumstances that you find here being so different than in Italy.
Yeah. Well, that's not uncommon. Did your dad ever talk about growing up in Italy during that World War II time period? What it meant, the deprivations, just what it was like. What was his feeling?
Oh, absolutely. My dad clearly abhorred fascism. I had a lot of uncles that were part of the Socialist Party. They would literally get beat up, so they would usually bicycle to go down to work in Lecco and come back to Galbiate. My hometown is kind of on a hill. They would wait for them, stories about the fact that they would get, try to coerce, to change and so on and so forth, and they wouldn't. I would hear stories from my aunts about, for example, how the black bread was what they could try to get. Black bread was basically bread with flour that was probably healthy, but not worked out. So it would actually be kind of a dark flour. But my dad, really, he abhorred fascism. That's why he felt fortunate that he was kind of insulated by means of Nogara. Although there was one episode I remember where he was asked to relay a package to someone in the area, and he was stopped. He was asked, what he was doing, what he was carrying, tried to explain it. They didn't believe him. They put him in jail overnight until eventually they came to find out who he was, and they released him. So, I mean, clearly they went through some rough times, but probably more the people that were in my hometown than my dad. I think Dad really managed to be insulated by a lot of that tough exposure to, dictatorial ruling. And because everybody, if they needed a job, they had to join the party, they had to become fascist, or they couldn't find work. And like as I said, my uncles, they were trying to resist that. They would really go through some rough times.
Did he have any recall of, because, Mussolini did get caught and killed around Lake Como, and that was sort of the region. Did he have recollections of that specific time period, not being there, but kind of any saying, I remember when?
Not really. No. No. Yeah, I don't think he had any, and it's possible again that he was not there. He just probably heard it, and I'm sure for a lot of people it was probably, frankly, a relief, that this menace could no longer, be around. But no, most of his stories were more about the experiences done in Rome, in Milan. I remember myself going with him and with my mom to see this orphanage up in Lake Como. And they had about 30 orphans all dressed up, with the same uniform. Again, supported entirely by the family. Kind of
Were they
interesting.
war orphans? I mean, you think the source?
I don't know. It's possible because they would have been, like in the 50s. So they could have been war orphans, yeah.
Yeah. So you find yourself, you left this.
By the way, if I can also interject, it so happened that again, Mr. Nogara and Mrs. Nogara would have a lot of correspondences, especially when he was in Constantinople. And one of his sons put together an anthology of these correspondences. And I have that book, and it's absolutely fascinating. So very rich, with both experiences, kind of his own challenges, that he was encountering. And on the other hand, mom being home with the kids, they had a lot of children, and talking about, who was doing what, their own age. But really a fascinating anthology of their own lives, to their own correspondences.
What was the correspondence, in Italian or English?
In Italian.
Okay.
Yeah.
When did you learn to speak English?
So the 1 year in Turin, we were exposed to some English, not knowing where we were going. So, English is a thing that maybe you should have, because we took French, in school for 5 years. So we kind of had an exposure, but very superficial. So then when we arrived here, the first semester we spent with an elementary school teacher. So we would meet with her every morning, and then they enrolled us at Medaille College in Buffalo. We took 3 courses there to get the second semester to get an exposure to the educational system. And then that summer we had the first course at the University of Buffalo. They had a special program for foreign students. So that was really the first, effort. But I remember it was interesting. Like you go through this progression where, for example, at Medaille, I thought I was already mastering my English. I could understand it. They could understand me. And then when I got the job at Leader Warehouse, all of a sudden I thought they were talking a different language. A lot of slang and a lot of...
Yeah, that's the slang.
Like it was like a whole other relearning process.
Yeah. So you are now at SUNY Fredonia, you study
UB.
anthropology.
University of Buffalo, yeah.
And then SUNY Buffalo, and you graduate there in 75. You brought that about
No,
that time?
73.
73?
With a bachelor
Okay.
in anthropology, and then 75 with a master.
75, and then you're thinking about an actual professional job in social work. Where's the next step?
So next step, again, talk about some of these threads coming together. Your ideal aspiration as a social worker is to be a psychotherapist. So there are two tracks in social work. There's kind of what back then they used to call a community track, more organization, community involvement, activism. And then the other one, it's all, psychotherapy, counseling, therapy type of process. That was my track. So, of course, at the end of that was my aspiration too. But in the first year, and it was a 2-year program which included direct experience within an organization, within an agency. So my first year of experience was with West Seneca Developmental Center. and frankly struggling to meet those type of experiences with the psychotherapeutic type of things that you were supposed to read text and try to apply. But at the end of the first year of Seneca Romano Center internship, I got a job with the state to the summer. So again, there was really good money getting state fund, state paychecks. But another exposure with the community services of West Seneca. Then the second year, I went through child and family services in Buffalo, which again was more counseling and psychotherapy. Then you're right, I'm looking for a job. Could not find anything in psychotherapy, or they would not hire me as a psychotherapist. No wonder, probably I'm 25, coming from somewhere else, even talking about cultural adaptations and such. So the first job I had was up in Niagara County with what they consider to be the first psychiatric social worker, Niagara County chapter of the ERC, with also a pioneer at the time called Marilyn Zader. I don't know if the name came across. So Marilyn Zader was another fascinating person with some characters similar to Michael. Very entrepreneurial, very creative, and very successful. For example, they managed to also establish 5 community residences at a point when nobody had any community residences, by means of having a development group that included 2 attorneys, a developer that actually was a fellow that built our Food Avenue ICF, to his own construction company, Smith, and 2 developers in the Buffalo, Niagara County area. So the 5 got together, put money together, they bought 5 homes, they listened to the chapter, sounds familiar, right? There was no funding, right, to build and
Right.
renovate. And were among 5 of the first community residences. Later on, that became a big issue with the state when they came back to find all of the details of how things were actually organized, and just penalize them for the fact that they felt that the actual transaction and the cost of the lease was not really market value. 10, 15 years later, they come back and they evaluate it on the basis of history, or by then
Sure.
they're gone. But anyway, so Marilyn Zader was there. Again, a character. She will be also the center of attention when we will go for some of these meetings at the state level, typically going on and on, criticizing the system and talking about the fact that there was not enough support. And she was there until eventually ended up getting the job after she was terminated from the position. So anyway, Marilyn Zader is there, and she hires me, and it's my first experience really being given free hand. She frankly had no idea what I was supposed to do as a social worker, other than she felt very proud that she had this, master level graduate psychiatric social worker. So great experience getting to work with the person that was responsible for the work center, Tom Glayer, that then eventually became exec up at Genesee County, working with the residential program, working with the children's program, organizing documentation, which didn't exist. And so I was there for about a year and a half until people from West Seneca that had known me through that summer stint there, they come to Jane Adam when Jane Adam was in the process of professionalizing.
Right.
And they say, hey, Paul, how about, we need social workers, how about coming down and helping us at Jane Adam? And that's how I came from then Niagara County to Jane Adam Development Center at that point, as they were trying to get people out to the institutions. And of course, top on the list of possibility to help people find in a place was the Resource Center. Back
So-
then was still the Chautauqua County Resource Center.
Chautauqua County Association for Retarded
Retarded
Children.
children, right, yeah.
Yeah, well, so that's kind of the late 70s, 78 time period.
Yeah.
And so you now have, through Jay and Adam, learned about the Resource Center. We'll just use that term throughout because it changes.
Yeah.
Resource Center. And the guy who was heading it that time was a guy named Mike Raymond. What, if anything, were told about him before you met him?
So a lot of great things. The fact that there was this fellow in Chautauqua County that was really making things happen, creating all sorts of opportunities. So back then, if you recall, the initial only opportunity for placement were family care providers, right? So, and I was given the title of coordinator of community services for Chautauqua County. So we had probably like 100 individuals at some point in with different family care providers, primarily in Jamestown, some in Duncan, Fredonia, Westfield. And then there was some of these new residences that were being talked about. But one of the first one, of course, being the big expected development for the intermediate care facility. And so as I had the exposure to, primarily, frankly, to Cindy Fieldgate. So Cindy Fieldgate was really my liaison. Michael was more like, as he would literally run sometimes. He would pass by through the halls. But really got to appreciate the fact that Chautauqua ARC was one of the best opportunities for Jane Adam to find opportunities for people, to find placements for people that we were trying to place from the institution. And as you recall, a lot of the people that were back at the developmental center, there was a great number of them that should have never been into developmental center, so very capable, verbal. So when they found themselves with a family, they went through more readily positive adjustment. But then eventually, there were individuals with no verbal communication, no expressive, receptive communication, and then eventually, of course, people that had all sorts of medical condition. So that became more and more difficult, and it was really through the type of work that Michael was able to create that we were able, to place a great number of them. And that led eventually to the fact that one of the things that Michael was among the first one to be able to obtain was this regulated license to create what they call the day treatment center. And so at that point, that's when they asked me, through Cindy primarily, how about if you can come in and help us set up this day treatment since you're coming from the state and all of their fancy regulations and such. And that's why after a couple of years at Jane Adam in 78, I believe, I joined the Resource Center formally, for the first time as director of clinical, what they call director of clinical services.
So I'm reading the Steve Watterson timeline. In 1978, the day treatment program was begun to serve the many people being released from state institutions. The program taught skills of daily living as well as providing a variety of clinical services. They also opened at that time the first residential facility in the Dunkirk area, the Dew House. And a lot started to happen in 1978, which was
Exactly.
this was kind of the beginning of the go-go years.
Exactly right, because, again, as we recall, the work centers were the only day services support because people could not really remain into community residence 24/7. So the work center were the only place that could accommodate those day hours. And again, for many people, no problem. It was more, the challenge was more for us to find work. But as some of these individuals with, as I said, no receptive, expressive communication, sometimes with a number of, health-related concerns, diets, need for close follow-up, with the level of funding and staffing that we had at the work center, it really was impossible to provide that type of service. Hence, the day treatment starts, and of course, the day treatment becomes the very first Medicaid-funded program through state and federal participation that provides.
That was the big part of Medicaid.
That was the big Medicaid start, yeah.
Fieldgate, Cindy Fieldgate.
Yeah.
Boy, do I remember her. But it's been a while. And for the camera, talk about Cindy Philgate.
So Cindy, as I say, yeah, she was really my liaison, my mentor in a way, because as I said, initially I didn't really have a direct relationship with Michael. And Cindy was, frankly, the perfect complement, to Michael, because as we know, Michael had the spirit of entrepreneurial. He would have developed effort the US of A, if he could have, right? But not too much interest into, once the project was kind of accepted and funded, he was ready to go to the next one. And so the details were left to, in this case, Cindy. So Cindy was the one that she was the social worker also, a master level social worker. So although Michael, around that time, still had major involvement, he knew every individual served at the organization, he knew families, and he was always receptive, to a lot of the issues and complaints, that would arise as part of the natural progression of things. But when it came to organizing and, staffing instructors and such, it was like, okay, there was Cindy. And so Cindy was really played a great complementary role to Michael, maybe in a way that maybe not everybody probably appreciated. She was the one that didn't hesitate to enter Michael's office, whether he was busy or not. In a way that like I did. I was very proper. It's like, if Michael is busy, I'm not going to bother him. Cindy's like, Mike, you got to do this, you got to do that. If you don't do this, we get in trouble. And so I really think, and also with the families, I had a great relationship with the families. And was really there at the time when we were moving from kind of the old DRC, parent-based, almost volunteer support, to start this movement into more of a professional based and again publicly funded system with the expectations. So I really like Cindy. Cindy, as I said, I think she mentored me. She allowed me to become integrated into the culture, of the organization at that point. And I really enjoyed the relationship, and I think she played a great role for us as then eventually she moved on.
Well, speaking of where, we talk about that, we don't know where she moved on to or where she is.
So my understanding is that she had a relationship here at one point with a Kevin. I don't know if you remember that.
With what?
Kevin.
Kevin, okay.
That was also my first exposure to Chautauqua. Kevin's family had a house in Chautauqua institution that they would rent out. And that's when I got to know about all of this amazing part of the reality up at Chautauqua institution. But I believe that she had twins at some point. Then she left, or Kevin died, and then eventually she had some other relationship. I believe that she had twins. And I don't know myself where she moved. I believe Chicago area. I'm not sure either.
No, it was just always one of those
Yeah, it
people.
would have been nice to know also,
Yeah.
because she would have a few tales, I'm sure.
Well, my recollection, there are very few people who had immediate access to Michael. Nobody more than Kay, of course, and Cindy and myself. I mean, I hate to say it, but there was kind of the three guys that could actually walk in, because Kay was the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
Kay was the gatekeeper. Give me some Kay Neri stories. We've been talking about her too, about stuff, because she clearly was your protector.
Oh, yeah.
And prior to that, Michael's.
Yeah. Yeah, I tell you, so fortunate that Kay became part of my own, especially subsequently when I got the position as director, from a number of perspectives. One, because you're right, she was the gatekeeper. You didn't go through her door unless she let you go through it. And you didn't need the protection, when you're just buzzing around like crazy. But Kay also had this really keen insight into people, both within the organization, outside the organization. in a way that she didn't have to talk a whole lot about it, but you knew that she had people down just like that. And then she would also accommodate, the dynamics of interpersonal, sometimes are difficult, when you have a lot of directors and a lot of departments and so on. She would do a masterful job accommodating all of that so that people would be okay, but she would facilitate a lot of that. Even many times beyond my back, frankly. Like it would just, people would tell you what they were told by Kay. Tremendous insight with board members. And as you know, some board members that were not always, especially in the early years, where the roles were kind of, not well spelled out, to help them feel that they were paid attention to, but also understood that, there were other things going on at the same time. So, I mean, and I kept up the relationship with Kay. After she retired, we would get together, just to reminisce. She loved Michael. She, I think, appreciated Michael both from almost like a maternal perspective. She probably felt that he needed a mother many times, and she provided some of that too. But also seeing how capable he was, and also sometimes how he could just get in trouble. And so she needed somebody like her, to really keep him within the walls. But as you know, she kept up her own support for Michael even when he left. And I think appreciated me coming in. And I think there's always a tendency, I believe, when you get a job, you see it in the politics a lot, where you just discredit the predecessor, almost like you have to reassert yourself at the merit of who was there. And both because I knew Michael and I knew who he was and what he accomplished, and she did too, we always ensured that we appreciated that. In fact, one of the things that she always reminded me until it did happen was, we need to find a place that memorialized Michael's in terms of the many things he did. And I always thought, what better place than Johnson Gifford, right? That's where so much started, both even in terms of clinical services and in terms of that fast, quick development of the work centers and a lot of the pharmacy and on and on. So I also felt, hey, kind of Kay and I, we felt, what do you think? I said, absolutely, we need to do it, so get it done. And of course it was okay. When every year it was almost like, is it going to happen, is it going to happen? And because we went through the major renovation, right, at one point with the Johnson Gifford building, it was like a perfect come together, I think, of certainly making sure that it became the Michael J. Raymond building, but also for Kay saying and feeling that finally, there was a way that his name would be remembered, and kind of leaving me alone for a while after that. No, she was wonderful.
So you have a 3-year stint as the Director of Clinical Services at the Resource Center, and then have an opportunity to go elsewhere what happened next?
Right, so again, great opportunity, those 3 years. So yeah, we started the day treatment at a time when, frankly, since we can be frank, not everybody, including Michael, understood or appreciated the fact that with Medicaid funding came all this regulatory expectation. So the funding came in and it looked awfully good. So there was kind of a per diem payment for each day that a person would go to the day treatment. And that revenue stream looked awfully good and very stable, very predictable. But there was almost like an expectation that we could continue to do kind of a super work center with the day treatment. And as a director, I had to read all those regulations and realize that there were all of these expectations, primarily of staffing patterns. Then you had to hire speech pathologists, PTs, OTs, psychologists, social workers, behaviorist people. And there was, again, the paradigm was different. So it was still kind of like holding some of those things to the vest. So there was, for example, no budget. So when you needed a new therapist, you had to go through, Cindy would be my in-between, maybe Becky or Michael, and they would say, well, we'll see when we can afford it. And I said, no, we have to do it now because they're going to come in and certify us. So there was a big adjustment that I felt was part of my first challenges, frankly, to go through, and it took some time. Again, there were no budget, so I literally remember coming up with my own calculations of what the revenue stream ought to be. There was based on the attendance and what money was coming in, and having to fight to say, look, I think there is this money, we need to spend it for this specific purpose, not for some other purpose. But again, great experience, great meetings we would have around the table around that time, all with a cigarette in our hands, of course, back then. And then we discovered also that in addition to the day treatment, there was the opportunity for a licensed clinic. And so we said, again, brought it up to Michael. Mike says, absolutely, if there's a license, let's go for it. So one of the first people to pursue that license under OPWDD that gave us kind of a clinical exposure way beyond anybody else in the same type of field, even considering to do it. But then, after 3 years, I was coming in from West Seneca every day.
Right.
So it was about an hour and a half ride. I had a better Fiat by then. It was a front-wheel drive, so at least that helped the winter. In the summer, we would come in with the bike. But it became a little onerous, to come in and out every day. And I thought maybe it's better time I settle down and find some place closer to home. And that's when I found a position with United Cerebral Palsy Association in Buffalo. Initially with residential services, when they were in the process of, again, the first people to convert residential sites into intermediate care facilities. And then from there I was asked to take over their clinical services. And it was shortly thereafter, about a year after or so, that in Niagara County, Maryland Zeta was terminated because of circumstances that happened up there, dealing with these issues of regulatory expectations. And so I put in my hat and I got the position up there in Niagara County.
This was as Executive Director of Opportunities Unlimited of Niagara, right?
Yeah.
So you're there. Then there was an opening at the Resource Center in 1988. And was that a knee-jerk reaction to apply? Did somebody give you a call? Do you remember how you kind of said, well, maybe I might be willing to travel?
Yeah, so it was a combination of things. Again, Niagara County, by the way, was that experience there was the most trying experience I've had in my whole career. So if you think about what happens there, the reason why Maryland was terminated is because parents were complaining about a number of issues. They felt that, again, some of the money that was there for residential was not really being used for services or even supplies. That they could not get an answer to their concerns. So anyway, based primarily on parents complaining, people from Albany decided to come in and investigate. And they began finding issues and concerns that they could not quite deal directly. So they turned it over to the then newly established Commission on Quality of Care. So I don't know if you remember that. Commission on Quality of Care was one of the first governmental entities to say, when these issues come up, they become too difficult to touch, even for a state office like OMRDD. So let's set up a separate commission. They can do the investigation. They came in, they did the investigation for 2 years. And as part of that investigation, they basically felt that the leadership had to be changed. Who comes in at that point? A person by the name of Mark Brandt.
No kidding.
So my brand comes in based on the fact that this investigation is taking place. They hear all of the initial findings from the investigations, which eventually they know is going to be published. It's going to become a public document. And so my brand comes in and tells the board, it's either you fire the executive or I fire you as a board. And because the board felt impotent at that point, and so they fire Maryland, and that's how they apply for a new position, and that's how I came in. And probably I came in because, again, by then, I had a lot of experiences with all the technicalities, but did not expect the incredible turmoil that existed there. Just to give you a sample, there was, the union had just been formed about 9 months prior to me coming in. So they still did not have a labor agreement. The person that was negotiating the labor agreement was a principal from a school, negotiated the agreement based on his own understanding of how classroom rules apply, which didn't apply all to us. Residential services, they had 2 residences that were in the process of closing down or shutting down. They had a day treatment program that was housed in a building, also, by the way, leased by the same group of 5, that had structural problems. There were concerns that the roof might collapse, and so needed to be changed. I come in, and so, and the day treatment itself was being decertified because the person that ran the day treatment thought she was all about arts and crafts, and she thought that she was all about arts and crafts. Again, did not apply all those regulatory aspects. So it was like, day treatment is there to be certified, 2 homes are going to be shut down, the building is going to collapse, the union is just in place, we don't even have a labor agreement. That's what I encountered.
Yeah. Welcome, Paul.
Yeah, welcome, Paul. And so for this first 2 years, it was literally a major weekly, daily crisis of any type. It would come in knowing that it was going to be like another disaster awaiting you. But then you got adjusted to the fact that that's going to be life, right? Every day is going to be a new crisis. And then after 2 years, things come down. And after they come down, we got all the certification, things were in place. The Commission on Quality of Care report was made public. And of course, I'm the executive there. So people forget that I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
But so very difficult. By the way, you notice in my reports about how much I stress public relations and community engagement, right? There was a perfect example of the community then not really knowing what was going on in Niagara and finding out through that report. We go to the first, well, actually it was the first ARC convention, state ARC convention for Tish. Tish had never been to one. I said, oh, come on down, see how these things work. She sees my brain just going on and on about all the problems of Niagara, but telling everybody how he saved Niagara. So taking all the credit for what happened. Tish never forgave him. She said, this is the last time I go to a convention like this, and I see that person there, which kind of started also to give me a lot of information about my brand, So, I mean, there was really a lot of experience to the 5 years. But then things come down, they kind of became more routine. But when I heard about Chautauqua, again, knowing so much about Chautauqua, I mean, I knew that, for example, again, Chautauqua had already established such a broad network of programs and services, very unique, in a way that most ARC chapters had not done. I knew that it had, like we also tried very hard up there to invest into work programs, but I knew that, like for example, we got a grant from the Gannett Foundation for $150,000. There was a major feed up in Niagara. There was not too much support in general, again, not too much understanding. And so we picked $50,000 to do 3 separate initiatives, like business initiatives. But I knew that here there was already an established really sound mindset, about how work can be like a serious enterprise. And I knew about frankly, I knew about the region, about the county, about Jamestown as a community. I knew that there are so many unique aspects, to Jamestown, especially Jamestown, but to the county, in a way that people don't often realize. A lot of the supports, a lot of the, the richness that is part of the fabric of Chautauqua, and especially Jamestown. And I frankly felt that with my experience and kind of my own personal, professional, and personal aspirations, I thought I could really do a good job here. That I could really help the organization move on. I'd heard, what happened to Mike. I could really help the organization move on, to better things. So that's why I was very excited to put in, throw my head at it, not having no idea, what was going to happen, how many other people, frankly, were being considered for the position.
So you come back. The board of directors, of which I was a part, made a decision that Paul Cesana, welcome back. And I know that one of the earlier things that happened was a guy named Fred McDonald sort of entered into, because when you have a new executive director, it's an opportunity for kind of take a good look or a relook at where you've been. And so Fred, you engaged him to come in and talk about strategic planning, and talk a little bit about what that meant to the organization, because that was kind of new. That we'd actually bring in a facilitator to.
It was new, right. So frankly, I had done that also in Niagara, especially given the circumstances there and the major upheavals that were happening. It was very helpful, to get some new eyes, some external eyes to come in and help you solidify kind of an assessment and a planning process. So, and I was always, again, also part of those 5 years I took at the community psychiatry, it was some of the best learning from a perspective of planning and kind of leadership perspective, because I could take kind of like one course per semester and apply it to situations I was already involved. So I knew what critical planning was. And when I came here, I really, again, all I remember was, again, same thing, how tremendously successful Chautauqua is, the many programs, the visibility. Mike had already built some fancy, I think the offices were already in place, like the Caprino building, some of the fanciest offices where people would come down and see Mike. It was like, wow, you should see, the type of office that Mike has down there. So there were the ICFs, I think, the ICFs already built at that point. So, I mean, some of the circumstances, the realities here were so unique already statewide. So that's what I was thinking. I'm going to pick it up and go, and we move on. But I always thought it's important that I get someone to help me to get kind of that outside support. Also because when you start a position such as this, again, you quickly get inundated with the day-to-day stuff, right? The meetings, the schedules, the decisions, the budgets, the funding, the new initiative, the new grant, and on and on and on. So to have a person that can actually move the process along, which takes months, was very important. Fred McDonald was like a renowned person. He was coming in from, at that point he was down in Florida, but again, a wise person, well-versed in governance, well-experienced. And so he's the one that actually, frankly, took most of the time talking with people in the community. And then based on some of those conversations, sometimes he would periodically take me in and say, you need to come in and see what they're saying, so that you can hear it yourself. And that's the first time I heard about the fact that while the organization had grown so rapidly, so successfully, there were all these pockets in the community, but pockets of movers and shakers. They really have issues, right, from, again, some of these misconceptions, such as the fact that all the people that now that we're becoming more visible in the community, they thought were because the resource center brought them in from somewhere down the state. The notion that probably because the resource center had always been so self-sufficient, there were people that thought it was a for-profit entity, where Michael was kind of the principal, the organization. And the fact that the board was kind of cliquish, they didn't really know who was on the board, and maybe the board was getting things out of it. And so that's when I felt it became a good opportunity also for me as a new exec. Where it's difficult to insert yourself in a system that has kind of a well-crystallized culture, right, and way of doing things, a way of thinking things, a way of doing things. And I come in and I'm kind of trying to, to push some of these things. So that became a great opportunity to do just that.
Did you get any blowback? I mean, the reality, anytime you're a new guy on a block, even as much as you look for, this is a bad term, look for cover by having a professional come in who is proposing, but nevertheless, it's going to be deemed yours when the day is done. And that means change, and change sometimes, whether it's parent groups, whether it's board members, whether it's staff. Did you get some kind of adverse reaction early on?
Absolutely. I remember one that sticks in my mind because it had to do with one of the then directors who had a nice history here and who probably was close to some of the board members who had decided to go in his own business. And apparently there was one of those policies about sick time accrual, whether if you terminated from the organization, you could actually get the accrual with you. But if you just took like a time of absence, you could not do that. You had to wait until you made a decision. So if you come back, then you don't mess around with the accrual, it's still there. But if you decide to leave the organization, it's yours. Well, this happens. I don't know about these policies other than to pull out the personnel policies that applies to everybody. And I'm asked, I'd like to do this business, but I'd like to take the accrual, it would really help me with the business. And I said, I don't know, what's the policy? It says, well, it says that, but. Brand new, and say, policy is a policy, I don't want to mess around with a policy. So I said, no. I said, no, you cannot do this. And I remember one of the first board members that we knew very well at a board meeting saying, this is the first major faux pas of Paul Cesana. Because he didn't make these accommodations. And I said, no, hey, all you need to do is change the policy. It's your policy. Change the policy and no problem. But part of what I'm here to do is to ensure if there's a policy, I execute the policy on your behalf. In a way, they became one of those first opportunities to also let them know how I was operating.
Sure.
But yeah, so some of those things, became part of the nature of establishing yourself. Again, that's why the strategic planning was important, because then, for example, the governance, right? The notion of saying, we're not saying that this is a bad board of directors. It's like you guys are putting heart and soul, but let's go back and revisit some clear written understanding of what you're responsible for and what I'm responsible for, so that you're accountable for that and I'm accountable for this. And it became those ways of beginning to articulate roles and responsibilities that were so important, especially going forward.
I've often had, because of our earlier conversations with some of your predecessors, talk about the community perception, misconception, or no conception of the Resource Center, and how really it was an organization which sort of dealt with the unwashed. That's probably not a popular term, but of people that they didn't understand and a clientele that didn't understand. And we worked very hard at the board, strategically planning, trying to think how to get out in the community, whether it was staff members, doing particular beginning of events, those type of things.
Exactly.
Did you recall much of that activity?
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Yeah.
So I recall, for example, the fact that from those perspectives, for example, from the perspective of asking for support. So, in fact, you were one that I think I created already that wonderful relationship with the baseball organization that provided some of that exposure and also some of the funding. But typically, and there were some initiatives, but there was almost the sense I perceived that like we didn't need anybody. You know, that we were so self-sufficient that we didn't need anyone. So one of the things that I felt strongly that we needed to do was to, for example, expand the membership. So the membership was also, driven typically by board of directors, some of the people that they knew, by parents, and really trying to say, no, let's use the membership as a way of saying, no, we need all sorts of help, including financial. And then the special events, the old-time fair, I think was probably the first one, and really kind of put together the best that we could, but just as a means of saying, hey, we are here, come to see us, but also, we need help. And of course, it takes time for some of those things to evolve and mature, right? And I was thrilled the way that eventually the special events matured into almost like a perfect scenario, right? Where you had like a golf tournament that really asked those movers and shakers to show up and come in and get to hear us, see some of our participants to be there, the putt over there, see who they are. The gas maker, 2,000 students coming in, and many of them really having no idea what they were just coming in to play basketball. So Steve making sure that there's the ideal newspaper that goes out, everybody gets not only with what happens, but some information about us. Laura around with the hotellings going up in the North County to ensure that North County also felt that they're part of this large organization, which then became a statewide event. So the state, NYSEG, actually used that event for their 50th anniversary and almost adopted, like I think from Chicago. So yeah, no, I think it was deliberate, but also, as it typically, frankly, happened, it was easy for me to say we need to do, there's my brother-in-law that talks a lot about the fact that my wife uses a lot of we. We need to do this, we need to do that, and she means, Paul, you need to do this, and you need to do that.
One of this royal we stuff. Yeah.
The royal we. But in a way, frankly, I also used a lot of that we concept, and I really need to do it, and then hoping that some champion, would emerge and take on that particular initiative and have fun with it. And on a lot of those events, that's exactly what happened, both with volunteers, with staff. It became like a combination, again, of energies that really produced some fantastic results, I think, through the years.
I must drop in a personal vignette when you talked about the old-time fair. Old-time fair, we had it at the boat landing one year.
Right.
And one of the many things was they had a dunking tank. And they asked for volunteers. And I looked around the board and, Greg, wouldn't it be nice if? And I said, all right, I'll be there. What time do you guys start? 9 o'clock. Perfect. I'll be there from 9 to 10. Nobody's going to show up. I'll just get the box checked. Well, word leaked out to a couple of clients of mine named Glenn Abbott and somebody else, Brian Hall, I think. And they at the time had in their apartments 2 Jamestown Jammers players who were both pitchers, okay? So they woke them up at 9 a.m. and came to the old-time fair and proceeded for the next hour. They didn't miss. So I'm up, I'm down. I'm up, I'm down.
Oh,
I'm
no.
up and down. And I
Almost unfair.
it was, they loved it. The guys are just having a field day. We made money, for the good of the cause.
Yeah.
And you know what they did? They took the water from the Chattacoin, and in order to get the bacteria out of it, they just put chlorine in it. I mean, just tons and tons of chlorine. So by the end of that 1 hour, I couldn't see. I mean, I was blind.
Wow.
I was blind. Somebody had to drive me home because the water, just your eyes are burning through the chlorine in the water because of the old-time fair, because these 2 guys They didn't throw one pitch, those two guys. They just kept giving money, 3 balls for $5, whatever it was. Boom. I didn't have time to get up in the seat.
Yeah.
So that, I just want to drop that in so you can talk about taking one for the team. I anticipated that nobody would show up at that first hour. I was so wrong.
I tell you, see, some of those things that really stretch you out. Like what stretched me out, for example, was the run, the Laurel run.
Yeah.
It was like, oh shoot, here comes the Laurel run. I haven't, more than walking, I haven't, make an extra fast step in a year. So then all of a sudden, I would try to do the run, and it was so bad that my wife, when she was, there was an ambulance coming in at the end, and she thought that the ambulance was clearly to pick me up. But what an effort it was when he would just do it once a year. He would try to do a little training just a few weeks before. And yet, for the good of the cause, he would do the best he could. Yeah. Golfing, after dear Carol passed away, he would do that ceremonial first drive, right? So then when he passed away, maybe Mike did it also for some time as well. Anyway, then eventually the honor came to me, and you know how stressful it is, to do a first drive with 20, with 120, players looking at you.
Were you a golfer?
So actually, I owe golf again to the cause because up in Niagara, we had a Senator John Daly. He was a senator at that point. And the then board president, Ken Ford, was a friend of John. They wanted to do an event there too. We decided to do a golf tournament. And we called it the President Golf Tournament or something. And I thought it looked such an easy game. That's when I first went out and I made a fool of myself. And I said, okay, if we keep this thing up, I better go there once in a while and see how this thing really works. And so, because I never played before, so that would have been like in the 80s for the first time. And then I really got to enjoy the game. And now I'm still a high handicap, but boy, I still like to get out there and try my best. But I'm not, you probably started golf through your early years, which is different.
Well, we had a little bit, but I haven't golfed in a long, long period of time. But occasionally, what I do recall about the Kappa, the first year, because Greg Vender and Carl and a few others were gathered at the Caprino facility, the office building, and Carl, he took it seriously. He took this very seriously.
Yeah.
And what he took seriously was the donations for the cause.
Yeah.
Because he had a number in mind which was going to blow away any amount of money ever raised, and that was a great thing. So Carl would hand out these slips, I remember this specifically, to everybody to call. And inevitably, these were friends of Carl's, vendors, because he had Crawford's, was just guns a-blazing at the time. And as Carl took it personally. And so when you would report on the following event, daily luncheon, and if somebody came back and said, well, he doesn't think he can do it this year, Carl goes, what's his phone number again? And then right there at the board table, pick it up and say, hey, so-and-so, just got a report that you felt like you probably couldn't do that, but, I bet you can revisit your decision, and we appreciate all your help. Boom. In came $1,000 check or whatever. But he took that wonderfully seriously. Yeah. And now he was very personal. So that's why that was successful. Yeah. And
there was an incredible relationship with Carol through the years. I think he probably appreciated the fact that it was this Italian guy, even if he came from North Italy, and he was coming from the South, coming to town and getting involved with this big organization. But he loved the organization, he loved the cause. Amazing.
Well, there was a relationship between you and he that is defined or not, but it was, he really appreciated all that you did. And he was, of course, related to Joe Caprino. And Joe was very engaged and probably took you out golfing once in a while.
Yeah. I think one of the things I remember was when, there was a twin city with Jamestown called Cantu.
Yes.
Remember? that also is known, it's actually close to my hometown in my region. It's known for furniture fabrication, except that, again, Italian style, there, a lot of this furniture is typically customized. You build a brand new house, and then you customize the furniture to the kitchen and this and that. So they tend to be smaller outfits. But anyway, the people came from Cantu, and he hosted them, and it was provided at one of the restaurants, one of those wood boards from here. And what I remember was like, same when Joe Trusso, my sister would come here on an annual basis to visit with me, and Joe loved to meet with her because he loved to still try to speak his Italian. And it was fascinating because it was typically Italian, really more in a dialectal form, but of the turn of the century, which has since really been modified pretty dramatically. So it's almost like meeting somebody that would, talk to you kind of in a Shakespearean way, with English. But they didn't care. It was like an opportunity to still be able to interact. And so at that point I did some translation for him here and there. It was fun.
As part of back to the McDonald was really understanding and maybe educating, not even re-educating it, but educating the board and its fiduciary responsibilities. So much of in my early days, I hate to sound like the old guy, but in 76 or so, it was parents. I mean, I remember a time I was the only one, very young attorney, and John Real. That was it. John and I were the only non-parents, or somebody had blood on the board. And that was a dynamic. In fact, we were just the two, I hate to say, business kind of conscious of it. And I can remember when we passed the first budget, which was $1 million. 1978, I think. 1 million, like, wow, high five. How did we ever get here so big? And of course, much happened thereafter. But that point is that over time, the bylaws changed a little bit, things got a little more relaxed, where it became less parent-related and more community-related. And then I think that was a very conscious decision. It may have been a Fred McDonald decision, but how did you manage that? I mean, how did you, because it required, as people were rolling off, maybe not necessarily inviting them back, and looking for a different, or expanding the board, that governance.
Right, I thought that, by the way, a big help, frankly, was Mike Felice, who became kind of my first president. And I think he was more accustomed, to a business model of running meetings, for example. So he really felt that ideally a board meeting should really be about, information gathering, discussion, but decision-making.
Right.
And I think part of that initial reorganizational process that certainly became very important for me, the way that I operated, that pertain also to the rest of the organization, directors and staff, was reorganizing the fact that you have so many variables, so much details. You have so many issues that were percolating, throughout the organization. And the danger was always that if you had, especially a parent, sitting on a board, that all of a sudden almost monopolizes a board meeting with an issue important to that individual as a family member, but not really important to the larger aspect of the business. It not only detracts, takes away, but it doesn't allow the governance to really focus on the decision-making, because eventually, people run out of time and attention. Right. So I think a lot of that initial reorganization was aimed, if you remember, structurally, for example, not only to have important board, but to have important committees of the board.
Correct.
Advisory, but committees, finance, programs, any aspect of the organization, to have a key committee that could really delve into all of those details and just bring up kind of a synthesis of what's important, and then especially making a recommendation so that the board would feel that someone had really spent the extra time. And that also allowed then the staff, especially leadership. And by the way, the type of leaders and directors that I had the fortune of having there was unbelievable. People really so capable, so driven, so passionate, that and they stayed with us, for the duration, so that they continue to grow and develop. Very, very fortunate. But so that those directors also felt that they had an opportunity to have somebody else paying attention to what they were doing, and yet also think in terms of what's important for planning, for results, and for decision making. So it became part of the kind of the whole orchestration, the organization, that then allowed the process of concentrating on strategies, trying different things, see what was important, but also concentrating on accountability. So measuring, right, making sure that you have metrics, measuring, bringing back results within the organization to the board, so that we all felt we were working together, basically. And those committees having participation for the community. So other members from the community coming in, appreciating the complexities, and many of them that becoming future board members. So it really became like a good restructuring that I think supported us through the years in a very successful fashion, I think.
Well, I think that's probably, to me personally, one of your greatest attributes to the Resource Center was, in fact, the capturing and successfully implementing a governance program, where, in fact, the board did what you read about should be doing, making decisions, which are policy decisions, based on information which was gleaned from committees. And frankly, in the old days, I hate to sound like that, but you'd have all the department heads at the board meetings. I mean, they would all be there. And, they just took time, each of them had their own little thing, and it just took forever, and you glazed over looking at all these mountain of information. So the boards really just were, I don't want to say rubber stamp, but they're just...
More like passive.
Yeah, very passive. And except for some emotional hot button, that was it, And then all of a sudden now to have these committees, which you then had a chance to bring in people either who were coming off the board to go to, or people coming up from, so you had a farm system, if you will. So that when it got to the board, it was a pretty synthesized report.
Yeah, and board members on a committee being expected to actually bring up that particular recommendation for a decision, so that he felt that, to feel comfortable with it and own up to it.
So all of a sudden I had 7 reports, and each of them had somebody on the board with somewhat familiarity, if not responsibility, and so accountability board meetings became much more quicker and faster, and it just is, to me, because I was involved with a lot of things in the community, this was very, very impressive steps that you did. I mean, this was, you did so much, but that's probably one where it doesn't get a lot of heralded, hurrah, hey, you did a great governance job, but you did.
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah.
It's important.
And with that came opportunities, which some of them which were picked up from Michael's days, but some of them which were carried on, that you initiated, which especially with the Allied and the contracts that you had with Nish and Jacobs, Wagner, O'Day.
Very good, yep.
Those things which created a budgetary boon, but at the same time with that growth came other issues, like unions.
Right.
And could you anticipate that because of the social, economic, political times with that Javits, Wagner, O'Day, that we would find ourselves in a position where we became really preferred? And contracts came, and with the contracts came financial revenue, but also, you had to fuel that machine.
Yeah, so I think, again, the way that I see it is that the whole culture of thinking about, the whole work centers vis-a-vis the employment issue, again, started with Michael. Michael has such a strong entrepreneurial spirit, loved businesses, loved the idea of trying whatever, was there to try. So when he found out about the Javits Wexner Day we started in 71, it was all about it. Again, another one of those situations that once you get into it, you don't realize until you are into it how complex they can become. Not easy, So for example, when I came, I remember that we had just been awarded the mosquito netting. No, actually it was the air cargo bag. It was the air cargo bag. Yet we didn't have any contract. And so I remember actually saying, okay, well, what gives? We got this contract, but the work is not coming in. And the issue, and I remember calling some fancy member of the President Committee to just let them know that we were not happy, and just to find out that apparently there was an Indian tribe that had a particular contract. And so they were delicately working with the tribe to provide some other type of work so that we could get that contract. So you find all sorts of issues such as those, and those are more political. And then once you get the contract, major expectations, to perform. So the couple of things that I always personally felt about it. One was the incredible opportunity that those countries provided from an employment perspective. I mean, we really had a variety of work opportunities that, again, 98% of the other organizations similar to ours could not even conceive, especially in those early years. Later on, people eventually they got more into becoming more creative, more innovative. But back in the 80s and 90s, people could not conceive of the type of work opportunities we have with the remuneration that we could provide. I mean, we actually had, $2.5 million payroll for about 600 individuals with severe disabilities. I mean, that was really significant from any perspective. So anything that personally I felt we could do to continue that type of investment, I was always about it. Again, the other factor was finding the type of staff and leadership with that level of capacity and both technical but also leadership capacity. Again, incredibly fortunate. Tom McConnell was on the way out as I started, but then somebody like Greg Bender, incredible work that he did, not only to always be ahead of the curve in terms of meeting those demands, but also dealing with the politics of it. That's why at one point he said, Paul, maybe you should go on some of those boards with Nish because it's important that we have some visibility. And I said, no, it's not me. You go on the board of Nish because they know you know the system, you're excellent at it, and it became a major visible factor politically at the national level, representing us and frankly bringing more opportunities back home too. So I think that whole incredible expansion was really a facet of having internal capacity, internal leadership, but also support from the board. And I think that the support of the board goes back to what we said earlier in terms of the governance. If we would not have had that type of organizational structure to show how we really had not only the technology capacity, but the fiscal financial capacity. I mean, at one point we would have like $10 million of suspended inventory. That's all cash, right? It's waiting to be processed and eventually to turn into a revenue and into a profit. And again, enough people on the board to either trust the people that were looking at that or to frankly trust our team that we were really capable to sustain that level of business. And it became a true business, right? So that we were one of the largest businesses, even regionally, and certainly one of the largest businesses of the type nationwide. So I really think that was an incredible attribute for our joint capacity to get to that point. But also, you're right, I mean, that type of, not only the employment opportunity, which was tremendous, but the financial opportunity. The financial opportunities allowed us then to deal with all sorts of other circumstances that were very dire. And they were more mission-related, but issues that without the financial support, I don't know how we would have faced, especially dealing with the intermediate care facility situation, the ICFs. As then the funding became more and more restricted, but the expectation continued, to rise.
And that was the gorilla that was created by having certainly the go-go years, and, you had probably half of your at one point $100 million budget, which is hard even, to this day, it kind of understand that number, was Ally.
Yeah.
And so as the things contracted from the War Department, because much of this was military, just defense funding contracted or other people got the jobs. But having had the heretofore use of those funds to cover underfunded program was now a part of what you had to deal with.
Exactly. The notion that ICFs were expected, because of the highly regulated environment, be Medicaid funded, they were expected to cover the entire cost, because again, they could, through recertification, right, which were happening on an annual basis, any demand you could not argue, you had to provide and sustain. What we didn't expect was that whole social political revolution that started from that fully funded, especially for Medicaid, ICF, state treatments, initially even community residences, to then limited funding. In the case of in the ICF, they actually froze the funding. So all of a sudden you have frozen funding with people that needed extensive, intensive clinical services. And that's also what originated a whole big development on the side of primary care, health services, psychiatric services, that eventually had to become open to the community, because it became another business, a business that could not simply be sustained internally by our own financial, but had to find a larger market, generating like a larger market of revenue stream to sustain the level of operating cost. And so they became like a whole other progression, to about 15, 20 years time. By the way, also challenged internally and externally. So some people saying, what are we doing? Why are we bothering to sustain these losses in primary care? Let somebody else do it. Well, the somebody else, to me, it's another event that goes back to those early days when I couldn't believe when I received a letter from the local physician community saying we can no longer accept residents from the ICFs. I couldn't believe it. I was like, what do you mean you can't? There are people in the community, you're doctors, and yet I knew the difficulty of providing that level of care vis-a-vis the level of funding that especially then was available from Medicaid. Bottom line was that the physician group that we were relying on, they said, go somewhere else. And there was no somewhere else to go.
Right.
So first we thought, well, I guess we had to hire a full-time physician. So we hired a full-time physician. That's not enough, because then to have coverage in the hospital, you need 2 physicians. And then you hire 2 physicians with all these demands and the nursing. And again, before you know it, you are in the business of providing primary care. So, I mean, things went from one thing to the other, to where basically we became also a very critical provider of health and psychiatric services in Chautauqua County that really needed those type of services, especially for people on Medicaid and people that were not insured.
How important was it to get that Article 28 license?
So that was fundamental. Another one of those seminal issues that occurred. So again, I remember when I was here talking with Mike, I think we should have Article 28. And then I remember being up in Niagara County and meeting in one of these NISAC meetings. Frankly, probably the only time I remember Michael going to a NISAC statewide convention. And the reason why he was there was because the large NISAC board of governors, they call them, right, was taking on the decision of allowing Chautauqua County to apply for the diagnostic and treatment center license, because it was a first. I don't know that they fully understood it either, but it was outside of the typical purview of what all chapters, including New York City and Long Island chapters, were doing. And so we obtained that okay from the Board of Governors, which, again, they didn't realize at the time that we became the center of the license of the statewide diagnostic and treatment. So when the other chapters had to do a similar endeavor, they had to establish a separate entity because they would have had to be subservient to our own entity. So that was massive in terms of an original decision. And then in terms of having the ability of providing those services, in terms of being able to bill insurances beyond Medicaid and Medicare. Later on, in later years, in terms of when the whole collaboration became the way to collectively find a ways of surviving with the advent of managed care, to be able to be in a position of even understanding what that meant working with larger systems, where their position was very well known to be into that type of environment. So that became massive, and again allows so many people, our own residents, to receive the absolutely best of care that they could have possibly ever received. Our physicians, again, were really passionate, truly passionate about dealing with the complexity of their medical conditions and issues that will come up at all time, and overseeing that and case management that and working with the hospitals, with the specialty providers. Again, so fortunate that we really were able to do that for the hundreds of residents and people that were part of the individuals being served by the resource center.
Board membership, again, I'll drop in a personal vignette, and this you can probably eliminate. Yeah. I rolled off the board at some point, and I remember getting a call from the executive director, Paul Cesana, saying, "Greg, I would appreciate if you would consider an invitation to rejoin the board." I go, "Paul, I've spent 20 years, whatever, it's time to roll off." No, I really need you for period of time, because we have a certain board member who can be very aggressive and intimidating, and your analysis was I was probably the only guy that could keep pace with that board member, and you brought me back. And I came in, I feel like coming into the 9th inning of a baseball game. I don't know if you remember that at all.
Yeah.
But that was part of what your governance strategy was, and it was just an indication of a blip, actually, but how you needed the hot button issues, which may be personal hot button issues, not to become agenda-breaking items. You got these big multi-million-dollar decisions to be made programmatically, and it's often easy to have a passionate, singular thing, which might disrupt board thinking. And you manage that. I mean, my little vignette is just a segment of how you saw an issue and managed it, and brought me in for a couple of years, and it all resolved itself. But it's that's indicative of how you did this, and I'm going to blow you up with a glory gun here a little bit, but you did it.
No, it's a good point, and I remember vividly the phone call about how about it, Greg? We need some help here.
Yeah.
And as you say that, I can recall that, frankly, I did that in a number of circumstances.
Sure.
Also dealing with other situations where sometimes I find myself in some quagmire type of circumstances, sometimes at the state level, sometimes with NYSERC, when we had intermediate sanctions, with the ICF at Fifth Avenue.
Yes.
Perfect example. So
Yes.
here, again, all of a sudden we find ourselves caught into this massive, I mean, intermediate sanctions is like basically, I always talked about it as being torture time. You have a person that will call me up first thing in the morning to ask me why we had medications errors in one of the units back at Fifth Avenue, and expected me to know what he was talking about. So you had this incredible oversight where you're under the microphone, and you almost may feel that no matter what you do, you're so incompetent and so imperfect that you'll never get there, and then eventually you get through it, but going through this torturous, time. And, by the way, perfect opportunity through those rough times for NYSERC to get involved and say, but we're always here, so we're here to pay attention to Chautauqua, and we'll make sure that Chautauqua is going to do what is right. But doing it from a very critical perspective, as you know, always trying to see if they could find some, false step on our side so that then they would have another opportunity to come in and interject themselves. Again, we had our secret agent there, fortunately, that was actually attached to the commissioner and the subcommissioner on quality assurance of OPW. That was kind of like our attachment. So while there was all of this massive formal flow of torturous information and expectations and almost projecting an outcome that would clearly be negative no matter what, we always had somebody there on the side that was really giving us the right story because of some relationships. So that's why these relationships are so critical and you need to have, especially when you run into some of these tough times.
Gosh, I'm just flashing back to that whole Foote Avenue ICF, when they came in guns a-blazing and auditors and, basically took over the building, the office building, the former Caprino, place, and going down there, and then we separately meeting with them, and then separately meeting, and how best to answer questions, and how best to publish, inevitably this was going to get out, how to put damage control, if you will, on something which people would not understand what's going on, other than state people coming in on resource center property. I mean, I hadn't thought about that at all, I just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, really
But again, you managed that well, and it
Yeah, and as we take particularly there, when some bad things happen, we always looked for the opportunity to do better.
yeah,
So that became an opportunity to say, okay, clearly what we did was not good enough. It caused a major tragedy. We need to ensure this never happens again. And so proposed to the board accepted a major infusion of additional professional involvement and staff providing quality assurances level that were until then really unknown, at a cost of a couple of $1 million, I recall very well, again, unfunded. So we had to sustain that level of investment until eventually you found some type of homogenic solution between the financial burden and the operating solution. But again, an opportunity to kick up our level of expertise and professional capacity to the next level, and we did, and then it spilled over into other facets of the organization that again became important later on. But I think we were always good in that sense, when we had some of these major crises, to kind of accept our own failure and our own shortcomings and find ways of looking at the improvements needed and the investment needed to bring it to the next level.
during that ICF, the New York State Association for Retarded Children, our parents organization, was always mindful, you could feel the tension and the pressure, because we were so big and had done so many creative things on so many fronts that they, I'm sure, felt they were losing some control, and we felt they had too much control. So that and re-enter, if you will, in a dramatic way, a Mark Brandon you again. You know, whether it was Niagara Falls, and many, many years later, here we are, because he was the executive director of NYSAR. So, without getting into a lot of legalistics, you know, what was the basic concern there that you felt and the board ultimately supported it too?
I think probably what made them most nervous was that NYSEC also knew that the environment was changing, and they knew, we always felt that like they needed to be more customer-based, you know, be of support to the chapters. And they felt that the chapters were more kind of an extension of their own being and their own essence. So they were kind of more of a top-down type of mentality. But in the meantime, we have proceeded, of course, with creating a lot of corporate entities that, again, provided that level of proper adjustment to that complexity and diversity that we had. So, and we did it, frankly, realizing that we could not do it through NYSEC, right? We could not go to NYSEC and say, can we establish a foundation? Can we establish another nonprofit that can do other things? Let alone can we establish another entity that is actually for profit? It would have never worked. So again, thanks to the support of our board, and I think that the larger capacity of governance that we have created of people that knew the mission of the Resource Center, appreciated the complexities, and were interested in supporting it, we were able to create that array of corporations that with a foundation dedicated to provide money, create a return on those investments to supply things that nobody would really fund, so we could really try different things. A filling the gap that would just do that, actually be in a position of doing services that would go way beyond even services for people with developmental disability. For example, people with brain injury. We had a lot of people, some of them with developmental disability, some where the brain injury occurred after the developmental stages of 2021. And the system was moving to provide some of the services, but they were beyond the capacity of the ARC. And it required, again, different type of legal, regulatory, funding type of strategies and supports that also require more freedom or quick action. But then the ARC was kind of a big entity, so real tough to do some of those things on an innovative basis. So entry, filling the gap, entry, support enterprises to go after businesses that we can create with the capacity we have, even if we have to pay taxes. No big deal if we have a profit and if we can provide employment. So those had already been established. And I think that what happened was that, so with the intermediate sanctions happening, I think NYSERC felt a weakness at Chautauqua. We actually were expected to go and make a presentation to the Board of Governors. So I remember Carol Lawrence, as the then board president, having to go with me to Albany, and a selected group of the board being asked to listen to this presentation. And we made a presentation in the best possible color, right? We're working on it. We are almost on the way out. We also had Tom. He was like a known expert in the field, and he came to make a number of presentations to us. Thomas.
From NYSERC?
No, he was like a consultant again, that provided services to ensure that you saw people from a perspective of being a person, individual. So he actually came and actually was amazed at the level of care, especially in terms of attitude from our staff toward the resident. He was there. Guess what? Mr. Brandt made a whole other presentation. The presentation was, this is a chapter that maybe has gone too far, that has done too many things outside of the normal things that we typically do, where they've taken too many risks, where this is an example of the type of consequences of doing too many things outside of what they should be doing and beyond probably the domain of their capacity. and just missing on our own mission, to provide service for people with developmental disabilities. So it went on and on. And again, no surprise to me, because I knew that Mark would tend to do those things to just show how important they were to the rest of their Board of Governors contingency. Well, you don't do that with Carol Lawrence, who all of a sudden says, wait a second, what are we doing here? We are paying, what, $150,000 in dues every year to this organization? And just when we need them, this is how they treat us, and this is how they basically exploit us? Who needs them? So that's where the impetus came from, really challenging what at the point had become, if you recall, more of an academic, continuous exploration, legal exploration, and argumentation of who was who. Right? We are a chapter, but a chapter with our own employee identification number, we pay our own taxes, we are treated like a separate entity, but then we have this other state organization over there that thinks that we are really them, but they don't send they don't pay our taxes, they don't send our numbers. So remember, that was an ongoing diatribe that continued to go from a legal perspective. Well, I think that situation did it. So I think at that point, Carol came back, talk with the board and say, maybe it's time that we simply attempt to clarify who is who and what are the parameters of our actual legal constitutional essence.
Right.
Hence, the litigation. So I think the litigation actually started, frankly, from a positive perspective. Can we go and try to go to court to say, look, we should be recognized as a separate entity because we are a de facto separate entity. And then, of course, once you enter that interesting path, then you get deeper and deeper into the we versus they, their argument versus argument. And that went on for 5 interesting years.
Yeah. You hung in there.
Not only I hung in there, but I think I told you that, frankly, one of the greatest benefits I saw from the litigation was that because we were in litigation, we were expected to kind of stay arm's length, which meant that there was no expectation for us, for example, to go through all the subservient, time-consuming aspects of the NYSEC proceedings. We didn't have to worry about explaining to NYSEC all the things that we were doing, especially at the time when the collaboration became so critical at the local, state, and national level. And so we were kind of left alone, and we had the extra time to just do the right thing and not being concerned about how we were going to get in trouble with NYSEC.
I don't think you sent money. I don't think we sent money to them either. Didn't we put
Exactly,
the money aside?
we put it in escrow.
Yeah, put it in escrow, so they didn't get it.
Maybe at some point.
Yeah, so that ultimately results though.
Yeah.
So it was kind of, I think both parties sort of walked away with a better understanding of each other. So I think it had benefits. And
Yeah.
of course it had benefits.
Yeah.
Was that a learning experience for you, though? I mean, you are a chapter executive, and there are, 50-some chapters in the state, and did you get reaction from other chapter execs?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Primarily, it was like, how do you guys actually talk about the guts, to take on, the divinity? Because no one had ever conceived of really taking them on, although everybody had issues with a lot of things,
Yeah.
but always very subservient. So yeah, we were in a very small minority with, Cattaraugus and another chapter, being in our position. But most people, it was interesting, they were almost scared for us and almost having respect that we could even dare to propose a different alternative.
Yeah.
And then also the interesting element was the fact that there were other organizations beyond NYSEC. For example, I got very involved with cerebral palsy state because they were doing some fascinating things on the health side. So we did collaboration with them. We did collaboration with mental health collaboratives in a way that, again, we were feeling very free, to do. But yeah, within NYSERC, I don't think, yeah, so you're right. We basically take like a 5-year respite,
Yeah,
hiatus.
gosh.
But not easy, not easy for me because I knew that I was personally in jeopardy, that, they would never forget about, what we attempted to do here at Chautauqua, and they certainly attributed that to the fact that somehow I misled the board or allowed the board to go down that path, from my own, perspective.
I remember meetings here, you guys would have strategy meetings at the Jackson Center. You'd use the boardroom, and you'd meet periodically here to talk about that stuff. You had such a interesting run with such interesting people, but you also integrated into the community itself. I mean, you were active in other organizations and statewide offices as well, which maybe not as many, your predecessors really hadn't thought, I don't want to say the value of it, but they just didn't have the time to do it or felt. But you felt that as a priority. And that was something which you could take a sense of pride. I mean, the Resource Center became you. It's just, you were the face of it. Does that dawn on you that, like, wow, you had a $100 million operation at some point?
I mean, you wouldn't think too much out of the fact that, there's $100 million going out, so let's hope that we get at least 101 coming in. Because one of our big, values was always, we are all about supporting people with their needs, that have any type of disabling condition. But then we would always say, but of course, it's mission first, but then we would always say, no money, no mission, because it's all based on support that comes with money. So no, I never really thought about the numbers. I think that in terms of the participation, I always thought that it was so important for me personally to gain from the relationship and interaction. For example, I was a member of Rotary here, right? And since I didn't live in Jamestown, I would get so much insights into the community, in terms of not only the happenings in the community, but people that were part of the happenings of the community. Great to come here when you would make your presentations, as part of Rotary. That became something that I really felt I needed to gain from, but Rotary gained from us too. So, we would have the opportunity from time to time. I remember one of the last presentations I made to Rotary, for example, about the Resource Center, and even saw how many people would say, no idea that you do so many different things, no idea about the business side, that it's a real business. You never did enough interaction. But then other relationships were really based on sometimes personal relationships. Chautauqua opportunities, for example. A lot of the people that we served were in similar circumstances. And so the mission kind of overlapped many times. When we decided that it no longer made sense for us to continue to subsidize the traditional services for 0 to 5, for the children's services, they became most critical to find another solution. And Chautauqua Opportunities was providing some of those services as well. So to find a way to join forces, and from there came Chautauqua Connections, right? Another corporate entity that would amalgamate those forces and those capacities to be able to impact in that way. And at the state level, so many things happening that I really felt that for as much as you try to absorb through information that comes, it must be incredible now with internet information. I don't know how you manage now to filter that information. But even then, right, you have all written information. So the ability to be able to go to some of these organizations, especially if you're involved in a leadership position with them, and be updated on all of this, not only what is happening now, but what might happen next, and try to really understand, where the puck is going to be before you put it into the net. Very important. So I always felt that, and by the way, not easy to do because it takes you away from home. It's extra time. It's an extra effort. But I always felt I gained so much, and it was absolutely critical. National level, same way, to be there. At the same time, promoting our own leadership. Again, the incredible directors that we had that also would do the same thing and try to encourage them and promote them and really support their own participation, even at the leadership level, into some of those organizations, so that they will bring back the same type of support.
Yeah, I just think of so many names of people who were part of carrying the flag of the Resource Center on a statewide level, the Harry Glatzes of the world, or
Right.
just, it's just a name of the one, and
Yeah.
I hesitate to go down a road because I'll
Right.
miss somebody, but remarkable how they really, from volunteer basis, just got juiced up, principally because of relationships they had with you. And that's it. In fact, I'm reading this here, Paul. I just want to know if you think this is accurate. This is probably something you did, Steve. Paul's leadership has enabled the Resource Center to thrive in always changing and sometimes threatening funding and regulatory environments. His knowledge, skill, and expertise in all areas of service delivery, including program design, implementation, regulation, and funding intricacies, is truly awe-inspiring. His management style, sense of humor, and very real concern for others have always been an inspiration to his staff and the primary reason the TRC has been so successful.
Jeez, I should get to know that person.
Yeah.
Wow.
Do you think you got the right Paul?
Wow, it's pretty overwhelming, but it certainly does, I think, capture, a lot of how I attempted, to be. It's like I really felt, again, we talked earlier about coming from Italy and the experience, as to what brought me here. So I always felt, that almost like this became my mission in life, and being so fortunate, so privileged, to have the opportunity to do what I was doing, and yet realize it was so dependent on everybody else. It was not me. It was like everybody else getting the job done, and me hopefully, being the impetus for them, to think and to move and to take risks. So I'm glad that, that's the perception. It's amazing. I think as I said, I really feel so grateful, really, for the people that were there before me, the Mike Raymond, the Marilyn Zaylor of this world, but then all the people that were part of my history, board members and staff, and the people that we served, that we saw. One of the things that I took pride in, especially in later years, was to take the time to go and visit sites. Usually Mary Jo and I would do the Hamilton, would do that on a regular basis. And boy, to see the experiences of people, like, for example, the experience of staff at the ICF, understanding the personality of some of these individuals that really had no expressive capacity of communication at all, and yet they understood them from their own personality, their own likes and dislikes, and they could relate to that. I mean, I think it's a part of God miracle that can happen here on earth with the exchange of people giving to each other, and Finley was part of that. It's just amazing to me.
What's the question you expected me to ask that I haven't? You were driving down here today, you knew this was going to be an interview about your life and times, and Did you kind of anticipate a question that I failed to ask you?
I don't think so. See, you're such a proven, solid, renowned interviewer that not only did your homework, but you came up with stuff that I didn't expect, like my own personal life that led me, here to the States. No, again, in 30 years, as you said, when you were talking about your own experiences with the Jackson Center, you could go on and on about each of these facets and all the stories. The tribulations. I mean, a lot of these experiences didn't come easy at all. I always felt that one of the fortuitous things that happened was the fact that frankly I didn't end up living in Jamestown. So having an hour to get here and an hour to go home, it was so helpful for me to organize my thoughts sometimes, to be on the phone and so on the way here, but then to kind of leave it behind, going home. But the point being that there's so much there that you could get into. But after a while, it becomes irrelevant, right? I think what you really, what you recall is the fact that you really gave your heart and soul, and so there's so many other people around you, and you feel good that so many people benefited from them. So it's almost like going from our own line, our own tag, from filling the gap initially, right, filling the gap. It was so well put because we were filling so many gaps at the point where there were so many gaps.
Sure.
And then we changed that to share the vision. And part of sharing the vision was, let's get the whole community. It's not just about us, it's everybody. And now more than ever. Now, basically the states and the feds are kind of washing their hands of the responsibility, and they really feel it should become a family and community responsibility, but it's not an easy thing, easier said than done. So the shared vision is so important, and ultimately, the making a difference in people's lives, I think we did, and hopefully other people, whenever they find an opportunity. Our experience with Joe de la Marure, remember when we
Yes,
did the event
absolutely.
here, which connected with what the Jackson Center is about. Like if you don't see the value in every person, look at what can happen. You start doing negative things, putting people down, going down a road to where you discard humanity. And Joe having that relationship with that friend of his, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully that's what's going to happen more and more in the future. I'm involved in an organization called Transforming Care, which tries to do that. They try to look at the community of faith, usually congregations, and saying, okay, anybody here in the congregation that maybe we can get involved to see how we can do relationships, to be supportive, because we'll gain from that relationship too. So hopefully there will be more of the future. I just hope we're not going to have the circle coming back again to where you end up people on the street and people
Sure.
really not having the key support that they need. But again, bottom line, no, I think you did a great job. It's been wonderful to talk about so many facets of what happened, and I appreciate it.
Steve, what's the question? You've been writing there. You got,
Oh, I've been taking, a few things. Tom Pomerantz was the name of the
Tom
guy. I was trying to
Pomerantz,
think of.
exactly, thank you, Tom Pomerantz. So Tom Pomerantz were recognized nationwide, and we brought him in a number of times, recognized for his ability to really challenge you, even people that have been in the field, to appreciate what it's like when you start putting yourself into a person that has this condition, and some of the things that we ignore, so that you really appreciate them, and you can be in a supportive fashion. Thank you, Tom Pomerantz.
I know we talked a lot about the federal government and the work we did with the federal government, but I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on how the local business community supported us, both in terms of what we bring business to the work center, but also in terms of hiring a lot of the people, hundreds of the people that we support to be able to have competitive jobs out in the community, and how important that is.
Yeah, I think, again, you're right, both aspects. The first aspect of realizing that, in a way, we became so specialized also, right, that at times somebody like Greg would have to actually think through, do we add another element of automation because we could have the capacity to have another automated process that yields, quicker, faster, more accurate products at a lower cost? Or do we allow some element of inefficiency because that provides more work and more compensation? But we really got very sophisticated in terms of the type of things that we did, and also relying oftentimes on other suppliers or vendors that were literally from the rest of the country. But, for example, like Jamestown, Carton, is it called? Jamestown Container.
Yeah.
Great relationship. A lot of those products had to be contained with their product, and they had to go through their own modifications. Great relationship with people such as those. When we were doing the tempins, great relationship back then with Carol, providing some of the wood at the point where it was still indigenous species, American indigenous species, woods that were needed. But then later on, I think, again, as part of that mutual understanding between us and the community and us, I think it was wonderful to see how other employers began to appreciate the fact that the people with disabilities could also be regular employees. And just that whole adjustment process needed, again, sometimes our staff supporting that, but really realizing that it's a benefit to them as employers to really find a very steady, reliable, effective stream of manpower. And then some of those experiences that we learned, right? Some of those great relationships that came about from people interacting that way. But again, everybody gains from it. So again, I think it's been great at the local level, great at the national level. The relationship we have with the different other similar providers, Montana, the Kentucky, again, thanks to people like Greg Bender really establishing that, but again, getting to appreciate and know of the unique position that the Resource Center had nationwide.
And then one other thing I was going to make, you were talking a little about Laurel Run.
Mm-hmm.
That first year in 1997, I remember going up to Ripley, and you and Marie Karuba was the board president at the time, and a few other people kind of jogging those first 100 yards or so with Wayne as he headed off. But then 3.5 weeks later, when we finished up in Columbia County, I drove Canary out, but you drove Laurel out.
I drove Laurel.
And I remember that you
Yes.
talking about what an experience that was.
It was a great ride. So it was just Laurel and I for how many hours is it? And that was a nice long drive, just the two of us, and just to look at Laurel's beautiful smile and be so thrilled that we were going together together. I'm not sure she really knew all the stuff was going to happen next because she was always part of all those, proceedings. But yeah, wonderful time, to be there with somebody like Laurel for hours. And not that I understood everything she was saying. She probably didn't understand everything I was saying with my accent either. But just wonderful, one of those great experiences. And then you're right, then showing up and having to do our first part, and it was like, oh, here we go again, see if I can survive whatever it was, the 2-3 miles of running. But we did. We did. And it was great. And we saw the whole rest of the state be part of that. Just wonderful.
Well, you're wonderful. Thank you for making the extra effort coming down here.
Well, thank you. I know you've been very persistent about it, so kudos to
I
you.
even
for
threw
making it
Bender in
happen.
the deal, my gosh.
Hey, Bender still owes me a fancy round somewhere.
Yes, he does, and I'll remind him. You
Good, please do.
delivered.
Yes, please do. Well, no, thank you for having me here. It's been fun.